to be discussing in this module how together, you as parents and we as educators can help children be successful. It's kind of a work together effort. When I took prospective parents around on tours, one of the more frequent questions that they asked was, where do your children go to elementary school after they graduate from preschool? And then the follow-up, which might have been as important, if not more so to them, was, and how do they do? Are they successful? Is the transition from preschool to kindergarten a relatively easy one? And how do you prepare them for that transition? And truthfully, preparing kids for kindergarten probably starts when children begin preschool, because there are so many abilities that they need. When we had discussions with kindergarten teachers, we had 2 children who came whose moms were kindergarten teachers. One of the things that they said, which resonated a lot with us, was that the children who made an easy transition into kindergarten and who actually succeeded the easiest weren't necessarily the ones who came in with academic skills. They were the ones who had the ability to function in a classroom that they acquired in the years that they were in preschool. So what do you think were some of those characteristics?
Well, I think that parents are often most concerned with their children developing early phonics skills and being able to count and know early numeracy. And that stuff will come. But I think what's most predictive of whether a child's going to be successful in kindergarten and later school is the ability to do things like focus, follow directions, listen, follow through with a task to completion.
Work independently.
Right. Work in small groups.
Right.
Work with others. Transition from one task to another task, to the ability to recover when something goes wrong.
I think that's a big one. I think that's a really important one. Also, be able to function in a bigger group time, take turns, realizing that, and we've had a number of kids who have something to say, and it's so important. And so that's a big learning lesson for them.
Yes. And on the other side, the kids who are maybe uncomfortable speaking up in a big group environment, helping them develop their voice.
Yeah. I had one teacher who said to me, I think it's important that children have gained some social understanding and are able, because it's a new environment for most of the kids, and some of them are at a school where they don't know anybody. And what she said is, if a child is preoccupied with who am I going to sit with at the lunch table, or during circle time,
or during outside time,
the
ability to go up to another kid and say, "Hey, can I play with you?"
Exactly.
That's a big
then
one.
They're not going to be able to focus on whatever it is that the teacher wants them to take in. Yeah. I think that it's good to know, especially for parents who have younger children, that the ability to focus, to do some of the things that we were talking about, are going to be a little bit more challenging in their first year of preschool, when they might be 2.5 or 3.
Yes.
rather than when they're 5 or 5.5 when they're ready to go off, and the expectation is that they can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very developmental.
Yeah, it is very
Very
developmental.
normal for little ones to sort of flit from task to task and not finish things and not be able to delay gratification.
Yeah, yeah. I also think, and I think this is hard for parents who are parenting for the first time, to realize that kids are different. And some kids have an easier time functioning in a group setting than others. Some kids at even 5 still are pretty
Impulsive.
thank you. That's exactly the word. And they need a little bit of extra help.
Yeah.
So that
Kids are different, and kids acquire these skills at different rates. So just that because your child is a little bit later in developing the ability to do these things doesn't mean they're not going to.
Yeah, and I think that across the board is something parents need to remember. I think very often it feels like the blind leading the blind, that people today are getting information from each other and comparing where their child is versus where somebody else's child is. And that is not necessarily a prediction of who's going to be successful in different venues in life.
It's not helpful.
Yeah. So that is the advice that I would give to parents. One of the other subjects that frequently came up when I would do tours, or even in parent orientation meetings, was parents' concern that perhaps we were not introducing, as you said before, certain cognitive skills, academics. And we were very fortunate, maybe about 10 years ago, to have someone send us this remarkable article having to do with this subject. It was, what if the secret to success is failure? And the article was printed in the New York Times magazine. And it was written by a journalist named Paul Tough, Tough, who wrote a book on this subject, How Children Succeed. And if you happen to be, we've always, in our parent body, have had one or two parents who gobble up any kind of, I want to say literature, but it's not quite literature, any kind of written material, books or articles on child development or things related to how children learn. And if you are one of those people, I think this book would be a really good thing for you to look up, because I think it's very informative and easy to read. At any rate, this article talked about studies that have been done by experts in a variety of fields, psychologists, educators, neuroscientists, and even the head of one of the studies was an economist. And they part of their study, their research, had them denying what they referred to as the cognitive hypothesis. And the cognitive hypothesis is an assumption that I would say, how many, 95% of people buy into?
Well, I haven't done a study, but that sounds accurate. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's certainly something that our school system adhered to.
Based on.
Yeah, and it really means that it is cognitive information and knowledge that's the predictor, is the word, of future success of kids. And when they talked about success, they were talking about a number of markers. It wasn't just success in school, but it was life success. And that included people who had higher education degrees, marriages, divorces, drug use, and a few other things. And so they were comparing
Probably income.
income and careers, all of those things. They were looking at that and finding out if there were variables that were predictors of whatever it was that they considered success. And they found a group of, I don't know, can you remember, 10, 12 attributes. Some of them called them non-cognitive characteristics. Somebody called it character. Somebody else called it personality traits. Some of the qualities that were listed include zest, grit, curiosity, optimism, self-control, persistence, motivation. I thought was a good one. Somebody had
Social intelligence.
Yes, exactly, and somebody had gratitude. I think that's most of them. What I think the reason that we were attracted, we felt gratified by the study because it reinforced everything we believed in and that we did. Many of those traits are things that come naturally in a preschool class. Social intelligence, helping kids to interact with each other, to learn to problem solve their conflicts. Curiosity, that's what we were all about, don't you think? Yeah.
To persist even when frustrated.
That's right, exactly. Or motivation. Everybody, child or adult, learns based on how motivated they are. How
the nice thing about little kids is they're intrinsically motivated,
Yeah.
and I think the best thing you can do is not to squelch that motivation.
Exactly.
To fan it and encourage it.
Exactly. And the thing that we spend the most time talking about during staff meetings was this thing called grit, which is, I think, close to persistence. It's basically when Tuff wrote that article that said the secret of success is failure, that's what he was talking about. That
It's not the ability to fail. It's the ability to get back up.
That's right, and try again, which is hard for most of us. It might be harder for some kids. Some kids bounce back up, but
and I think it's harder for some parents of some kids.
That's right.
It's very hard to see your child struggle, and it's hard not to immediately jump in
and want to rescue them. Exactly. Which is why I think that we gravitated that as like the attribute that had the most impact on us, because preschool teachers are often empaths, feel things deeply, and so are a lot of parents. And exactly what you said, kids at 3, 4, and 5 are adorable. And to see them struggling, and for somebody who I don't even like to hear my cat whine. It drives me nuts. But to see little kids really struggling, I think our automatic response is to go in and try and fix it. And if you do, you're kind of robbing them of an important lesson that they need to learn, is that sometimes it is hard to be able to do something that you haven't done before. I used to use the comparison. I would sometimes talk about a child's favorite, basketball player, or a artist, or a singer, and talk about how difficult it was for them to be as good as they are now, and it took lots and lots and lots of practice. Remember the times that we talked about the brain being a muscle?
Yes.
And that you need to stretch it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would talk a lot about practice in general, practice doing things physically,
right,
and then practice doing other things. That everything is difficult at first, and that everybody has things that are difficult for them at first, and that we all need to practice to get better at those things.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's a real valuable lesson. I've seen kids who are kind of afraid of getting hurt. They're afraid of the blood. Well, and there are some kids who are afraid of doing something that doesn't come to them naturally.
Afraid of doing something and it not being perfect the first time.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's limited to kids. I think that is true of adults as well.
That limits a lot of us.
Yeah, if you're a perfectionist, you know, if you expect a lot of yourself, then you might give up.
Now we're going to introduce our friend and colleague, Adrianne.
Former
colleague who worked with us at our preschool in the class for the oldest children. And she's wonderful. And
she's agreed to come in and join us and discuss this topic.
Hi, I'm Adrianne. I worked in the pre-K classroom at Susie and Amanda School for many years. I followed Susie from her previous school where we worked together for about 13 years. I was lucky enough to be
and we were lucky
picked
enough.
up again.
We were lucky enough.
And found a home there. I started teaching many years ago after finishing a credentialed program. I didn't see myself in a school setting. I needed a little bit more freedom. I needed the ability to be creative, and was lucky enough to answer an ad at the school that Susie was working at. And that's where it all began. In the classroom, when we're trying something new, I will say, this may be a little hard. You may need to try this a couple of times. And I think by setting that expectation, if the child can't do it the first time, they already have it in their head that, okay, I may need to try this a couple of times. And I think it's easier for them to keep trying. That's something that I would recommend that a parent or a caregiver do at home, is to set an expectation.
I'd say that one really important thing to do when your child is struggling is stop and take a breath before jumping in. It's okay if they struggle a little bit. It's okay if they're getting upset. And eventually you might want to step in and maybe help talk them through it without necessarily fixing it.
Doing it for them.
Yeah. And I think that is really good advice to parents. I want to give a shout out to how difficult, and Amanda, you know this, to be a parent with all that's on your plate, and to be patient while your 2-year-old decides that they want to put their own shoes on, and you have somewhere to go.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have time to let them struggle through something.
Exactly. So instead of berating yourself for not 100% being able to do that, I think that you should carve out maybe some time.
Yeah. It's okay to not always do it. It's okay to sometimes just put their shoes on because you need to get out the door.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing is, and I think I mentioned this before, human beings are different. Kids, there's no one size fits all that describes every 3.5-year-old. And some kids are harder to parent than others.
Yes. And sometimes when you're jumping in to help, it's not just to prevent them from being sad, it's to prevent a 45-minute meltdown that you don't necessarily have the time or emotional wherewithal to contend with at that given moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is entirely understandable.
Yeah. And you might want to decide with your partner how to respond to situations. where your child loses self-control, and figure out ways to respond.
Yeah, and different. That's going to vary from child to child because different children respond to different things. Some children might need you to pick them up and hold them and put them on your lap, and some children might hate if you do that. So it's going to depend on your child.
Adrianne, I am wondering if you can talk a little bit about how we try to prepare kids for the transition from preschool to kindergarten. What do you think was the most important issues that you had to deal with to help that transition take place?
There were a couple. We were very skill-based. So we practiced a lot on listening. And we practiced a lot on problem solving and a lot on independence, doing things for yourself. And asking questions, finding out more information. Listening to others as well as listening to, to us as teachers. And those, I believe, are real important skills to have.
I saw both you and your co-teacher numerous times conferring with either an individual child or two children who were having a conflict. There was a lot of discussion there. I think there was support. There was understanding. But I think your goal, from what I could tell, was to allow them to have a positive social interaction, to learn that difficulties, conflicts can be resolved if you talk about them. If sometimes
but I think you really facilitated helping them figure out what to say on their own. You didn't feed them lines. It wasn't go say you're sorry.
No, not at all. It was identifying what the problem is. Why are you upset? Why are they upset? What can you do? Identifying the problem is number one, but then the next step is, now what are you going to do with that information? And how do you get what you want? And how can you help the other child get what they want? So there's a lot of negotiating. And there was at some points, we also learned how to negotiate, to learn how to give somebody something that they want. In other words, if you had a red truck and I wanted your red truck, I tried to convince you that maybe you want a blue truck. Maybe look at my blue truck. I've got this great blue truck that goes faster.
Who did that?
Right? That goes faster than your red truck.
Powers of persuasion.
You don't want that red truck. Exactly. And so we kind of help the kids learn how to get
what they wanted.
Don't stop at, no, you can't have the toy. But think of, what does that child want that you could give them? And so to learn the finesse, right, the finer points of negotiating.
At our school, our classes were roughly divided by age, not strictly, but roughly. But in the mornings. In the afternoons, the children who were staying longer days came together. And so they commingled, and we kind of had the opportunity to see the older kids. They had the opportunity to see the younger kids, and we had the opportunity to see co-teachers. And it was clear that expectations that we had of our kids was different than that of what you had. And hopefully 2 years later, they would be with you, and you would up the expectations. So we would model
for the younger
kids.
The two of us worked in the younger classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
2.5, 3-year-olds.
Yeah. So if somebody comes and takes a toy from another child, which is one of the more frequent conflicts that we saw with our younger kids, because their philosophy of life is what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine and everything is mine.
If I want it, it's mine.
That's exactly right. If the child who has the toy taken from him is overtly upset, they're going to let us know, and we can facilitate a conversation that that child can say, I'm still using that. And the other child can say, when you are done, I would like a turn. With 2 and young 3-year-olds, a teacher needs to be right there and kind of facilitate that discussion. With older kids, maybe not unless it's something that's extreme.
I think an important thing to point out is that we never forced an apology. I think
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that is a
uncomfortable
good.
with
Right.
telling a child to tell another child that they were sorry if they clearly weren't sorry.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just it's an empty
Yeah. Yeah. You're putting
It
words
also
in a
puts a
child's.
period at the end of
Right.
that incident.
as though that
whereas-
makes it all better.
Yes. Exactly. That's
whereas
exactly right.
It's not a period.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a comma, and then there's more
Yes,
to
how are,
that
how are
than-
we? Yeah,
Right.
how are we resolving this? We took a more active approach maybe than some teachers might. Active in that.
I think we would first ask the child, "Were you done with that?
Exactly. Exactly.
And do you want to tell so and so
Right.
that you were still using that?"
exactly.
And then if they didn't, then I think we would intervene.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And with older kids, you're watchful as far as, I mean, I don't know if grabbing toys, though, they did, yes, they did, or it's my turn on the swing. It's not fair, you had more time on the swing. Yeah,
Initially, they would come to us and they'd say, so and so took this from me. Okay, well,
What
did
are you
you
gonna
want that to happen?
yeah, yeah.
And what if
are
they
you gonna
didn't
do?
come to you? If you just observed?
If I observed it, then I would check in with the grabby and say, did you, was that okay? Did you
Right.
want that to happen? And if not, I would empower that child to speak up and to say, or if they didn't feel comfortable speaking up, to ask, do you need my help? And then we'd have the 2 children together and instigate a conversation about what happened, but none of the I'm sorry business, because that really doesn't help in a future situation.
No, and it doesn't really help either of the kids. It doesn't help the apologizer who is saying something that they don't genuinely feel, and I don't think that it helps the one who's being apologized to.
I remember a few instances where somebody would say, one child would say, I'm sorry, and the other one would say, I'm sorry, and they had no idea. For the younger, exactly. They had no idea who was responsible and who should be sorry about what. I mean, at 2 and 3-year-old, they don't have a clear understanding of cause and effects, and so they
still,
really,
yeah. Why did you hit him because he's crying?
And that's also something that I don't think we say very much. Why did you do that? I don't, with younger kids.
Because they don't know.
They don't know.
So to ask them
Exactly.
to answer a question that they don't know the answer to is unfair.
Yeah, exactly.
And setting them up to fail.
Exactly. We also don't use the expression of that's not nice.
Yeah.
Or look at his, we would do a lot of, and again, this is for younger kids, but can you look at his face? Can you see that, to me,
He's so sad.
he is so sad. I wonder why he's sad. So that we can help in terms of picking up emotional cues. I saw an article about readiness for kindergarten. It was about redshirting, and that there's a tendency more among people who are financially comfortable about giving children an extra year so they can be the bigger one. And there were pros and cons, which I think is true, though for the most part, I think it's been our tendency, and again, it changes now with the public schools, and at least in California, offering transitional kindergarten for 4-year-olds because they might make the decision on readiness for kindergarten. But when we were advising people on that, we looked at maturity issues way more than cognitive
yes.
issues.
I think often parents would say, I know my child is ready because they're so smart.
Yeah, exactly.
They know so many things.
Right,
or,
right.
You know,
Yeah.
They're learning to read.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we've found those reasons way less compelling than other considerations.
Yeah. I do think that public school curriculum has changed, I would say radically. Other people might have a different opinion on that. What used to be first grade curriculum has now filtered down to kindergarten.
And perhaps now
And
into
that's
TK.
exactly TK. And if your child is on the border, I mean, we talked about all of those characteristics of long-term success. I think that private preschools, good private preschools, are better equipped to help kids in those areas than public schools that probably have very specific expectations of pre-K and kindergarten teachers. Also,
They have a more rigid.
Time.
yes,
We
exactly.
just had time to
Right,
do this.
right, exactly.
And we didn't have a curriculum that we had to, where metrics needed to be met. We just had the
Yes.
luxury of time
Yeah.
to let each child grow into that.
Yeah. If we observe a child to be maybe less mature than some of their peers in certain
Although
areas.
I don't know that we I don't know that we like that word.
Okay, I think you're right. I was
It's hard for
struggling
me to
with that.
know
Yeah, exactly.
exactly what that means.
Well,
Because a child can be mature in
many
certain
ways.
areas,
Yeah.
and not mature in other areas.
Exactly. So if they're more intense, if they struggle, if they have a border birthday, if they are high energy,
Right.
and are going to have difficulty sitting for long periods of time.
It's a child who just needs to play.
That's right. That's exactly right. And even TK classrooms that or schools that allow TK classrooms to have a play-based curriculum, they have less teachers, and they also have expectations of where their kids are. And so, regardless of what some people say or think, that if I put my child in, they are going to be, it would be advantageous to them when they move from TK to kindergarten, because they will have a year of being exposed to the beginnings of academic material. I'm not strongly in favor of kids struggling with feeling inadequate.
Yeah,
I
think
feeling
we strongly
like
believe that earlier is not necessarily
that's right.
better.
Exactly.
If a child is not ready, not only is it not helpful, not only are they not going to acquire those skills that you want them to acquire, but it can backfire.
Yeah,
they can
exactly.
end up feeling bad about themselves, feeling
Exactly.
like this is not something I'm capable of doing.
And really disliking school.
Yeah.
Which is not what you want. I mean,
No.
more than anything, you want kids to be motivated to learn.
Confident.
Yeah,
what they know
exactly.
and can do.
Exactly. So I think that's an individual decision that parents have to make. I know that for many, it's a financial decision.
Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, we've advised some parents to argue with the principal with a child with a border, the cutoff is.
Yeah, you're allowed to advocate for your child.
Exactly. The cutoff, I think, is September 1.
Yes.
And we've had some kids, boys more than girls, and that I would use, difference in terms of milestones or maturing in a lot of
Yes.
areas, and boys maybe, but sometimes girls, with August or July birthdays. And a parent will say, I think my child belongs in a TK class versus kindergarten, and the director says, the principal says, no, by their age they need to. I would say, as you said, advocate for yourself.